Should we give it a couple of more minutes or? Oh, yeah. I guess most of us are here. We can start. So yeah, I noticed the PR that Dan submitted. Drew, you had a comment. Is there anything else that we have to do, or we are ready to merge that?
I'm trying to remember.
It's just the cleanup one where I just went through and made a few simple changes that'll just make it so I don't have to make those changes in my follow-up PRs.
I also had a couple of questions about your HackMD, Dan, regarding the changes that you want to make to the P2P spec. So once we start, I can also bring it up. I left a couple of comments. I know it's a bit late, but I left a couple of comments on your doc. Not sure that you've seen them.
I haven't, but I can take a look, or we can just discuss it now.
Yeah, let me bring it up so I can see, remind myself as well.
Can you share the link here as well, Shahaf?
Let's see. Yeah, I can. I'll send it in Telegram. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
I sent it.
So, Shahaf,
Okay, so
yeah, go on.
Yeah. Okay. Please ask. I'll continue after.
No, go on.
Okay. So the question that I had is basically you proposed to add basically a mempool ID subnet count. Okay, so that once you on the initial handshake between peers, instead of discovering all peers on all mempools without filtering them, you want to have some kind of an initial filtering process. Now, the question that I had is whether it's to deny to prevent attacks or just to optimize normal behavior.
Yeah, it's just to optimize finding a peer that supports the particular mempool that you are looking to add peers for. So it takes if you're on a relatively obscure mempool, this is something that we don't necessarily need to do in V0 of this, but if you're on some obscure mempool that has way less peers than the canonical mempool, you might be stuck having to continuously find new peers, connect to them, ask them all the mempools that they support, disconnect when they don't have the mempool that you want, and then ask the V5 for more peers, and then do the same thing. Whereas if you have some ability, and this doesn't give you perfect ability, but if maybe it gives you a much better chance by dividing into 1024 subnets, you can at least find this a peer on your subnet, and then there's a higher chance that the peer on the subnet supports the pool that you're looking for. With the caveat that I think I don't know if I think I wrote this. It's been a while, but likely would want like the canonical mempool to not count in that, so that if you don't accidentally get on the same subnet as the canonical mempool, because then any of those subnets it'd be basically very hard to find a peer that supports that, because you'd be stuck asking everybody who supports the canonical mempool what mempool they support.
Exactly, and that's okay. The likelihood of this, even not malicious collision, is just the likelihood is very high. I think when you have many mempools, especially if each mempool is based on also the targets. So many targets can have then many different mempools, and like a collision with the canonical mempool is pretty much inevitable. So it means that now you need to also define the mempool ID differently. Like you need to have a way to change it if you don't like it, basically. No, unless I'm missing something.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably worth adding more detail here, and also I haven't even written the PR for this portion yet, because I think it was the portion that I was the least confident in, the changes to the discovery protocol. But I think a solution here would just be to, as part of this mempool subnets field, you just don't add a entry for the canonical mempool. We could either add another, if we think it's something that bundlers can opt out of supporting, like if they don't want to support the canonical mempool, maybe we just add a Boolean that just says supports canonical mempool, and that's just dealt with separately than I switch this to alt mempool subnets, and it's very clearly only for alternative mempools, so that we don't have this collision.
Okay, so I don't like. I prefer that we don't have a special treatment for the canonical mempool. It is just another mempool, because yes, it is different, but in some aspects it isn't. For example, if some mempool becomes ubiquitous and everybody wants to support it because, I don't know, it's USDT, everybody wants it, behaves just like a canonical. So if you have a special treatment for the canonical mempool in your discovery mechanism, then it means the discovery mechanism is not generic enough. It is a problem. Yeah. So I don't want to exclude the canonical mempool, even for this reason. If you find it is unoptimal for the canonical mempool, it means it will be unoptimal for other mempools too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We need to keep it in,
and
special meaning, but not in the discovery.
Makes sense.
I would also okay, good.
Yeah, and likely this collision issue needs more thought with regards to.
I thought of a lightweight mechanism, discovery mechanism, in that is define the ENRs, the boot ENRs of the mempool in the mempool. Like if as part of the mempool document we say the ENRs are this and that, then we find a way to discover them. It is less efficient because if there are many small mempools and there are ENRs for many of them, so you might end up connecting to many boot ENRs. I'm not sure it is a good idea, but
so you're saying each alt mempool would have its own boot nodes?
They could overlap. Yeah. They don't have to be unique, but this.
Okay, so
but then you have a single point of failure, right?
Partner is manually configured with the mempools. We do want maybe not at first, but we do want to define mempools good enough so that even the canonical one will have a mempool ID, it will have the a document, and then the ENRs can be described there. We just moved some of the configuration into a standard discoverable configuration file. And this is a way that I'm not sure it is the best way, but it is a way to find mempool IDs.
It's a way to find like a couple peers, right? So you'll find the few peers that are listed in the document.
The boots.
The boots. And but then you need to find more peers. So then you need to be able to talk to those boot nodes and say, hey, can I have peers specifically to this mempool?
That is no, you ask them for peers, but that is the case also if you don't have a canonical ones. Because the flow right now is you connect to the boot peers and you ask for peers, and you start to check them one by one if they support the mempool you like. And here I agree that you need a mechanism to filter out, because there are two extreme cases we need to support. One of them is we have a huge network, and there are mempools like the canonical ones, maybe others, that are supported by thousands or many thousands of bundlers. And the other extreme, I'm trying to use a mempool that is supported only by few bundlers because it's new.
Yep.
These are the two extremes, and everything in between. So we use the boot nodes for the first, because this is the standard mechanism. So I boot. I bootstrap with the canonical with the boot nodes and start looking from there. I'm not even. I don't know exact flow how you use it right now. I didn't go into the algorithm, but this is how you start. You start with the boot nodes and start from there. So the same mechanism could work also for, say, alt mempools.
Okay.
The question that I had initially about it is, if you know how much inefficient the current discovery protocol is, like did you run any tests for it, any benchmarking, anything like that?
It's very hard. You need to create a very large mempool in order to find it out.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's definitely not a problem at the moment. Like, it won't be a problem for a good amount of time. So, like I said, this isn't necessarily something we have to solve right now, as long as we know that we can upgrade the protocol in the future when it does become a problem.
Yes.
Exactly.
And adding ENRs is a way to overcome.
It's a workaround kind of a thing.
It's an optional. You can either look for everyone or look for these mempool specific boot ENRs.
Dror, we already talked about it before, like Dror and I. So that's like I had a question, so I asked Dror initially, and Dror, as we said, we don't have to solve it right now, even though it might be a good suggestion and a good solution to this issue. Let's first encounter it before we are trying to change it, because honestly, I think that there is still a lot of work to be done on the mempool, on the canonical mempool, before we find a solution to that.
Yeah, and I think this makes sense to me. I also think it's actually a pretty simple upgrade path, because it's basically just adding a new field to the ENR that you can use to optimize your connections. It's not even like a necessary field. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm definitely okay with leaving this out. I especially like noted that it's a problem for the potential problem for the future, and we can solve it in the future.
I mean, while we are on that, I had another question. We raised this earlier during the initial discussion of the spec, but can we probably consider making this mempool ID deterministic? The more we start to test this on several test nets, there is an onus on us to publish the YAML file and quote the IPFS hash always. If we can do this deterministically, every bundler on each network will know what is the canonical mempool deterministically determining the IPFS hash.
I'm not really understand what you are asking for.
So, for example, now for Sepolia, I had to recently publish the IPFS hash and define what is the canonical mempool ID. And bundlers have to hard code this in their code. So the problem now is if a bundler wishes to run the bundlers on a new network, then it waits for the canonical hash to be published. If we can do this deterministically on each network, then we don't need the bundler to code to be changed every time.
I think I mean the way we discussed it before is since it's the hash of the file describing the IPFS of the file describing this mempool. We said that the mandatory fields would be the chain ID and the entry point address, if I recall correctly. So so as long as you know these. As long as you know, you know the chain ID of the network you're going to use and which entry point is used there, which is typically the same everywhere, then you can calculate it. You can calculate it yourself. You don't.
No, there was another field defined, I believe, the minimum stake, which changes for each chain. So that's the problem right now. We can't determine it.
Which component?
Stake value.
Minimum stake.
Minimum stake. Oh yeah, right. It's right. Yeah, that's a problem. So yeah, you don't know.
It is a problem. We define the mempool ID as the content of the file, and which means that any change to the content of the file or even the format of the file, like adding fields,
it actually changes the meaning.
It can't be. If we define some deterministic value for the mempool ID, it means that it is not the content, but a link, a reference to an external place where to. What I suggest, if you want the mempool ID, you can, instead of having the hash, you can use a URL. The URL can point you to GitHub. Now, as long as you trust the GitHub, which has a copy of the mempool, as long as you trust that this URL will not be modifiable, nobody will modify it after submission. Like it will be a pointer into GitHub, into a Git commit that we put. Then, as long as you trust that, then you are okay with the URL. It can't be deterministic in any other way. The idea of having a URL is actually the mempool ID is like ENR. It contains it's a blob of information that you trust. Using a IPFS hash means that even if the blob of information is big, instead of copying, cut and paste the entire blob, you put a hash and you know its value will stay the same, and IPFS network makes sure that you have data availability and you will be able to get the content. But if you want this link not to be connected to the content, it means that you trust someone to keep this association. So use a URL. I think that it's not a spec, but implementation may use a URL to the mempool ID. It's good enough for in many cases, and but for production, I strongly suggest, of course, use IPFS hash or local copy. You can use a local copy. Put a file that contains the data you like.
Okay.
I agree that the putting in the ENRs is something that you can say, I don't really care about them, because the ENRs can change. It doesn't change the essence of the mempool, only how I find it. So in that sense, I agree that the boot ENRs maybe don't define the mempool itself.
Yeah.
The other fields, you cannot have them in any other place.
Okay.
Cool.
Right. So we also published the boot ENR for Sefolia and deployed the P2P infrastructure there. So if other teams wish to test this on Sefolia, it's fine. But you were going to chat with Ethereum DevOps to confirm if there's wider support now on Sefolia for flashbots. So we couldn't.
I think that last time I looked, it was like 30%.
Yeah, it was around 30%.
So what exactly do you ask, Yoav?
No, we were looking to have a target of at least above 50.
Above 50.
Because that was what was in Godly. I think Godly had around 60% of flashpots. I mean, it's not a showstopper. We can still test it, but I'm not sure the conformance time, and we'll only discover that during the complete testing on Sefolia.
Just a second. I'm trying to see where we check it.
There's a URL builder relay. I'll share that here.
Builder relay Sefolia Flashbot.net, but
yeah, that's the one.
I see validators total. Okay. There's a total of 2,000, almost 2,000 validators, out of which 800 are registered. These, I'm trying to understand if these numbers are by a validator registered, means these are flashbots?
These are flashbot. I mean, they run MEV get.
Okay. And what's the block rate of Sepolia? 3 seconds? 5 seconds?
5 seconds. Yeah.
Okay, so roughly 15 for or less if you try to push if you accept reverts. Also, I noticed that I didn't get an answer from Vid. I tried to create a configuration.
Yeah.
Between Skanda and Cilius. Dan, does your bundle support P2P?
Not yet. Yeah, I basically built enough of it to have comments on the spec, and we'll continue building it once we finalize the spec.
Yeah, because I pushed. I tried to create a configuration for Skanda and Cilius. It doesn't work. They seem to connect. They don't break, but I don't see any messages in the logs, and they don't pass the single test I have there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we seem to have this issue even when testing it as standalone, two separate things. Two Cilius nodes, bundlers are able to speak to each other, but Cilius and Skanda, when we test outside of your test area as well, there seems to be an issue with SSZ. So Will was looking into it. We don't know where the current state is. I mean, probably Candid Sheriff had one setup. I need to speak to him to see if he managed to have a Docker image created, and we could probably test with that.
Okay.
So I'm still looking at your PR, Dror. I'll continue to use that as a base and see if I could add either Cilius or Voltaire's test nodes to see if we can work on it.
What we also need to add more tests. Right now, it's a very minimal. Need to think of find more of them. By the way, Dan, regarding the comment about structure, as far as I understand, SSZ doesn't have any container overhead. So I don't think there is a difference between a container holding a single field than a single field. It's encoded the same.
I took that wording from the consensus spec, where they use, for single field responses, they say SSZ field, and for multi-field responses with names, they say SSZ container. It's possible that they're like on the wire, those are the same things, and just in the spec they just have a version, like a name, like they call it a container if the field has a name, and if it's just a single field, they don't give it a name. That might be the only difference. I'm not an expert in SSZ, so I'm not sure if on the wire they look different. But yeah, I tried to keep the wording for that the same as what's in the consensus spec.
I try to specs are complex enough to read that way, and I'm trying to skim away redundant words and say things that doesn't matter. Maybe I should better filter it when reading instead of trying to fix it. It doesn't really matter.
I'll spend some time making sure that is true, that there is no difference on the wire in between a container with.
Yeah, it's not dynamic in a way. And if there isn't a difference, it means there is an inefficiency in the protocol.
Yeah.
That encoded unneeded information. Because
with regards to that PR, I don't have write access to actually click the merge button. So once that one gets merged, I have 4 more PRs that are all staged just on my fork that I'm ready to put up, that go through 4 of the other parts of the proposal in HackMD. So would love to get those PRs onto the main branch soon, so we can continue discussion there on the PRs.
Okay. Part of this, the spec is basically yours. So if you approve it, can you merge it, or do we need?
No, I think the PR has been submitted to ETH Infinitism repo. So you or Shahaf only can merge it.
Okay.
Yoav has messaged something. Yeah, we are unable to meet him. Hear him, sorry.
What is it? I don't understand.
No, he says that he has spoken to DevOps, Ethereum Foundation DevOps, to increase the number of validators running flashbots. I think it's a response to the earlier topic that we were discussing.
Okay.
Cool. So yeah, if you can merge that, and once Dan sends through the other PRs, we can amend the P2P thing accordingly.
Okay.
Implementation and other. So Dan, are you looking to complete yours based on your updated spec, or you'd have a version of the P2P implementation with the existing spec ready before then?
No, I'm gonna likely hold off until the spec is amended and just implement to the updated spec. That's kind of what I've been working on, other things, and waiting for the spec to be updated.
Okay. So do we then have I mean, at least a plan on paper by when we would like to have this ready in order to make the announcement? Does end of January sound like a reasonable time frame, or is it too late? It's more, I'm looking at you, Dan, and more a question for Dror and Chaf as well.
Yeah, I mean, so from my end, like, there's not a ton more code to write. Like, once the spec is updated, I'll write a version that adheres to the current spec. Maybe we'll find a few other things that we might want to go change in the meantime, and then we'll be ready to test. So I mean, I don't see an issue, assuming that we can move some of these spec changes through on getting like our implementation done by the end of the year, which gives us like January to do testing. And it sounds like there's at least 2 other bundlers that are with the current spec. They'll have to likely update to the changes. So maybe if everyone's kind of ready with their implementations by, after the holidays, we can potentially start integration testing then. And it seems to me like end of January sounds reasonable, but we have to take into account that at least there's the holidays at the end of the year that'll slow things down a little bit.
What time is the holidays?
So we're off at Alchemy between the 23rd and the 2nd. I don't know if that's just in the US or will be less so outside the US.
You are in the US, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
most of Europe is closed during that time as well. So yeah, it's safe to assume that there won't be much work done, at least to the last week of December and the first week of Jan.
Cool. All right. I saw George just merged my PR, so I will move my other 4 PRs onto main, ping them into the core devs group. We can just talk async on those PRs. They're essentially the same thing that's in the HackMD write-up.
Okay.
It'd be great to get those merged, or at least discussed and modified and merged, or denied if we don't think they're worthwhile, just so we can kind of make progress on this next version here.
Cool, that makes sense, and I'll probably reach out to both Voltaire and Celia's team to see if as soon as your PRs are ready for them to pick up, and then we'll ensure we are ready for testing probably mid of January.
Cool.
Was there anything else that we needed to discuss? Or?
I would love updates on the 0.7 entry point. I've seen a lot of activity there from you guys, so I'm just curious kind of what's going on there, what's the target. And one thing specifically, Yoav and Drew, you were both out for the last meeting, but I wanted to follow up on some conversations we had with Shahaf, specifically around a proposal that might be suggesting that we change some of the structures, like the user operation structure, with like unpacking it and packing it, and just curious what the status is of that, if I'm explaining that correctly, Shahaf.
Yes, there are changes we are trying to push, some security issues and also some alignments with the native version. 0.7 will not be fully, it will be more, but not fully aligned with the, we do want them to be exactly the same, so that the same account will support both. We understand we are still not there, and pushing 0.7 too much in order to achieve that is it seems a stretch. So we do add some things that Shahaf is working on, like gas limits for the paymaster. I understood that otherwise there is a security breach, basically. So we have to add separate gas limits. The user operation itself becomes very big, and we still need to sign all these fields. So the idea was to pack them into a single field, multiple fields. That the other change that we're pushing around that issue. And lately, you saw there's discussion about adding the execute user op that was requested. Just a second. Shahaf. No, Shahaf, I cannot hear you. Can you speak? You have the same problem as Yoav. You cannot hear me. I don't know, maybe try to exit and reconnect, because no, you're not. Okay. Yes, Yoav said also.
Hey, can you hear me?
Oh,
yeah.
Now it's okay.
Okay, I don't know what happened. I started talking.
I tell you what happened. It's a problem. I think I saw such a problem before with Google Meetings. Yoav, maybe you should disconnect and reconnect again, and we'll be able to hear.
That's extremely weird, because I started talking, and then Dror started to talk over me, and I'm like, no one is reacting. It's like, it's so big. I'm like, okay, it doesn't make sense.
New virus spreads through Google Meet. So.
Yoav?
Yeah, let's see.
Yes.
Okay, now I hear you.
Yeah, it was really strange. It was showing me as if it sees that I'm speaking. I mean, it was flashing my box.
Exactly.
Right. I tell you what is the problem. What's the real problem? The real problem is that you don't open the camera. Because we should have seen you speaking. You see?
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried that for a while. A few minutes ago, I opened my camera. I tried speaking.
Okay, and it didn't work either.
Okay, now you can hear me.
Oh.
Now you can see
Yeah.
me. Yeah, okay, so
Right.
it's so weird. Like I was talking and I didn't understand why no one is actually.
In the past, I noticed with Google Meeting that the network is not so great. They have breakage in the network, and suddenly you both broke away because.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the new version, the changes. I don't have it in front of me. One of the things we're still working on is compiling this file with the rationale of all the changes and understanding. And yes, as you said, the trade-off for execute user op, I don't like it. I think it's better to go without it. It's very expensive to pass the user op. But there are people who think that it is a good idea to have it anyways. So yes, right now it's open to discussion. It's not,
I mean, having it optional. It's having it optional in order to support these use cases and to support to make it easier to migrate wallets from chains like zk Sync that do expose this during execution. I think it's probably worth adding it. You know, it doesn't cause any harm for anyone who is not using it, except for the 40 gas increase, which is really not a lot.
No, changing several methods for the gas is a fluctuation of adding garbage. It changes it up and down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I didn't read the spec in detail, but I'm wondering if there's a possibility that someone can submit a user op to a bundler, but also execute the same user op using the execute user op on the contract. Is that possible?
No, because in the call data, there's a magic value saying whether you pass the entire call data to the call and execute it this way, or otherwise you are using a specific method call called execute user op and execute it. You go this or that. You cannot go. It can be mistaken. The security breach, if at all, is if someone tricks an account to sign a user operation that contains exec user op instead of something else. But if that's possible, I can trick the account to sign whatever I like. It doesn't have to be execute user op. I can execute a change account owner because there's a method in the account to do that. It doesn't open a new vector. It is the same vector, just one more signature to check.
I mean, remember, it has no effect on validation. This is all we did there is to add. You know, the account can have any number of execution functions, and ERC 4337 until now didn't say anything about execution functions. So here we just say that you have that we define one execution function which you don't have to use. But if you do use it, it has a special meaning. It gives you the entire user op instead of just call data. So it's just one of the execution functions that you can choose whether to implement or not. But since it doesn't affect validation, it doesn't change the security model in any way. And the execution function is something that the account should only allow from entry point anyway.
Okay. And one other question I had on the get user op receipt implementation. At the moment, if user op did not successfully get processed on chain, the user op receipt continues to report as null. We've looked at different implementations. I was wondering, is this on purpose, or is there a standardized way that all bundlers can report a proper error message for in case the underlying user op has failed on chain?
Let's ask about transaction. If you do get transaction receipts, okay? What is the standard implementation of a node for that? As far as I know, if it is included, you should return it. If it is not included on chain, it depends whether you as a node see it in the mempool. Because if you see this transaction in the mempool, you can return it as pending, but you don't have to. Sometimes you get a pending transaction from the mempool by calling a node, but you cannot trust that. Sometimes you get null because that specific node you are contacting doesn't see the mempool, and it can only report of already included transactions. So with the user operation, it is the same. It is true that inclusion is different, but it is either included and you see it on chain, or it is not included and I have no idea why.
Yeah, but the only difference in this case is that the transaction would have, the underlying user op would have failed on chain, not necessarily not included. And the user experience here is the end user does not know whether the user op was processed or has processed and has failed.
What do you mean by failed?
So the bundle that was submitted probably would have failed. The bundler that relayed the user operation on chain failed because of some error.
So that's actually not considered the fail. I mean, a user operation fails. Usually, it would mean it reverted during execution. If it reverted during execution, you are supposed to see, just like a reverted transaction,
because it succeeded.
Yeah, but if the entire bundle failed, then this bundle just didn't happen. It's not a part of the protocol. It was something. It was an invalid bundle. So in that case, there shouldn't be any. It shouldn't affect the protocol in any way.
Also, if there is a mempool, and let's say someone created a bundle, put 10 transactions into it, and somehow it failed on chain. Okay, that entire bundle didn't happen, but so the user operations are still in the mempool.
Yeah, they are still in the mempool because otherwise it would be a censorship vector. Otherwise, you
regardless of the previous failed one, take 1, 2, more, less, I don't care. But eventually get your user operation and put it in a valid transaction on chain, and then it will succeed.
Yeah, it has to be still pending because otherwise someone could censor you. Someone could include your user operation in something that fails, and then your transaction,
I consider reverted on-chain bundle is a bug in the bundler. I don't care about bugs in the bundler. It's true that right now you're using the same RPC, so if you caused a bundler to revert on-chain and you will resubmit it, it might revert again. But again, it is because a bug in the bundler and no other reason. Once there is a mempool, some other bundler will pick it up.
Equivalent of
several revert, one will succeed. Ta-da! I got it on chain.
It's the equivalent of a block of a node propagating a block that doesn't adhere to the consensus rules. It's just an invalid block, and other nodes are not going to consider it in any way.
Right. But I'm not sure if the bundlers that have currently present implement or resubmit a user op that's reverted on chain. I'm not sure if it's done yet.
If they don't, they have a bug. Because
I would say so.
The only reason to remove a user operation from your mempool is after you see it on chain included. Because think about that. Because think about reorgs. Let's say you submit a bundle, and eventually this block got reorged out. You should restore your user operation. I will never do it into the reference bundler because I don't care. But a bundler should actually, after seeing that user operation got included, you should move this user operation into an on hold, waiting for these blocks to be finalized. And only after being finalized, you can drop them. Because if those blocks are unfinalized, you should return them into the mempool. And if that bundler doesn't do it, no problem. Other bundler will. And
so that's how Rundler works. So Rundler in our architecture, the builder, the bundle builder, and the pool are completely separated. When the builder picks things out of the pool, they stay in the pool. They only get removed from the pool once we actually get the user operation event off the entry point. They get put into a temporary spot where if the block gets reorged, then they get put back in the pool.
So other bundlers can ignore them because we have bundlers that will include them after.
One thing about that though, we found that process has actually, we had to implement some fun stuff to make the spec tests work, because the spec tests kind of assume that after you send user operation, that they can then dump the mempool, and that the user operation won't be there anymore. So we had to build like a way to, like, I don't exactly. I need to double check what we if we had to make any changes. We do currently have a fork of the spec test to make it so when we dump the mempool, it's after the block has been processed by the bundler.
Great comment. Please check it. Write it down, because if we need to fix the tests to be more compliant with the real-world system, we should.
Yeah,
we need to
we'll let you know.
It's a debug mode. Yes, because the tests run sometimes in a slightly different manner, but we need to figure it out to make sure that we do this correctly. We don't want you to work on a fork of the tests.
Yeah.
We want to specify it correctly. I'm not sure what but we need either a new debug method that in order to handle this case. But we need to make sure that all bundlers are able to support it.
Yeah.
I need to recheck. I think that the reference bundler also removed from the mempool only after get inclusion, seeing it included. But yes, of course, it is tested only on test networks. It's not which have almost immediate inclusion.
Yeah. We'll let you know. We're working. You guys added a lot of new tests and spec updates and that sort of thing. So we're working to get fully spec compliant, and we'll be hopefully getting in the bundler executor in the next few weeks here.
There is the reputation tests are.
Yeah.
We added the reputation tests that are currently very, very heavy. We're adding some debug method to reduce those so that it will not take to test it. It's ridiculous. And make the test also more robust, less determined side effects.
I actually have a follow-up to part of this question with regards to the receipt stuff. So I think I agree with everything that was said about the receipts, is that if it's not included on chain, there's not a user operation event for it. There's no reason it needs a receipt. One thing that the spec does say about user operation by hash that is slightly different than how like an Ethereum like a regular transaction works is that user operation it says return null in the case user operation is not yet included in a block. The way Geth works, at least, is that it will actually return the transaction object without a block number if it's still pending in the mempool. So you can say get user operation by hash, and it'll actually look at its mempool and it'll return the transaction object with just a null block number, null block hash. And actually a lot of wallets will use that to like make sure that their transaction is still pending, at least in the node they're talking to, and understand if they need to resubmit. So we're actually going to be implementing that in Rundler.
But it is, you understand that it is, yes, maybe it is a good idea to add it, but it is heuristics. Because I see that sometimes you submit and immediately contact the same node, and you don't see it, and it gets included.
Yeah, no, I totally agreed. I think it's really only useful as a way to just double check if you need to resend something. Like the way Alchemy prices our RPCs is it's really cheap to call user operation by hash, but it's a lot more expensive to call send user operation. So it actually makes sense to just like send your user operation once and then pull using the cheap method, and then eventually if it's dropped, then you just resend it.
The problem with user operation is that get transaction is cheap. Get user operation is more expensive because it performs get logs.
Yeah.
True. Yeah, and we're working to help improve that. There's a lot of stuff that we can do.
Yeah, to optimize this path, because we are using logs, because this a node could optimize these specific logs to a better, at least to cache the values for the past X minutes or something, to optimize on that.
Yeah, that's what we're mostly looking at is building caches to reduce our get logs pressure. But regardless, I think we're going to slightly deviate from the exact wording of the spec, and we are going to return and the transaction object with null block number or null block hash if it's pending in our mempool as a way to signal to our users it's still pending.
I think it is better to fix, not to deviate, but to fix the spec and say that block should or may return. Okay, it should, if it knows this user operation from the mempool, it may return it with a signal that it is not yet included.
Well, that's worth discussing then. Should we change the spec? I mean, is that something that people would want? I think our users want some way to know that their user operation is still known.
I understand, but again, it can't be more than a should. It is not a must, because again, transaction doesn't do it either.
I agree with the should.
Okay.
We're going to implement it, but I feel like if the spec said should, that would make sense to me.
Okay.
All right, I can put up a PR to change the wording.
Ah, cool, great. One thing I want to ask you, maybe you can help us with that. It's general, trying to understand the general how wallets are using RPC methods, like estimate, if all, or even the get transaction. If you have statistics on how much RPC calls are used and how much relative load each operation has on a node.
Yeah.
Because if you get us something, statistics like this of RPC calls, because we need to match that in some way with the user operations, and we are different. Like estimation could be more expensive. A get transaction, oddly, is if you know, a get user operation is more expensive than a get transaction because of the way it has to be implemented right now. But what I know it is more expensive. I don't know how much it is used. Like, for example, I know that Ethers performs get transaction immediate after each submission. After each send transaction, I know that Ethers submits it immediately. So I don't know how, in terms of load on nodes, it makes. So
in our
they provide us.
We have a highly optimized, like in Alchemy, like a highly optimized get logs processing system that makes it a lot easier to service these sorts of requests. But in terms of like on a single node, these sorts of get logs queries are actually really tough to run, because you have to, well, it depends on the range that you put, but technically ETH get user operation by hash. Technically, if we're assuming that a bundler is supposed to report get user operation by hash, it's acting as like an archive bundler. It should return the entire names, like you would have to actually scan from at least the where the block where the entry point was added all the way till now. And that's essentially like a node can't even process that in a reasonable amount of time. So most bundlers these days say, I'm only going to look at the last 50 blocks or whatever, and we're going to act as like a full node. So we serve the whole thing because we have a get logs processing system. But
how do you process get transaction by hash? I believe you do have that. You index all transaction by hash and have a link into your database to that get of all hashes, right?
Yeah.
So of course, when it's going to be enshrined, but a bundler can collect this hash of get user operation hashes so that it doesn't have to do get logs in order to do this query. A bundler has to process all the logs in order to know what to remove from the mempool. So basically, it does all this processing. If it saves it into a cache, it can use it to optimize referencing those.
Definitely, we have a backlog ticket, something we haven't gotten to, which is basically to start building a database on the bundler. So the bundler itself has a database of all user operation hashes and user operation receipts, just like a node has a database of all user operation or all transaction hashes and transaction receipts for quick lookup there. And then you'd have this notion of full bundler, which only has 100 blocks worth, and then you have an archive bundler, which has the entire history of the chain indexed in its databases. Right now, we view bundlers as more kind of stateless objects that can kind of be moved around, but I do think the long term of bundlers, especially as we start to couple them closer to nodes with like native tracers and that sort of thing, might look like having these native databases.
Yep. But then we also run into the challenge of having to run bundlers or centralized entities processing them, although trusted entities. It's not easy for an individual to spin up the bundler and try to process their own user ops. So there is a trade-off there anyway.
Yeah, for the read methods, for sure. You'd have to run an archive bundler. To run a full node bundler would be, you would just have to sync the last 100 blocks, and it's not that bad.
Yeah.
Archive nodes in general, though, it's the same problem in Ethereum. Like it's not feasible for essentially anyone to run an archive node other than a node provider, unless they want to spend some days syncing. And Reth's making it better, but it's still not something that your average user is going to do. And I think it's the same with full versus archive bundlers.
Yes. Yeah, but I think that if a bundler starts, even if it's stateless, to read when it starts, to keep the user hashes of the past day, to keep it in cache, either on disk or in memory, is something that it's not that difficult to do. Again, it's an optimization to save RPC calls.
Yeah.
You do it once when you start, and keep it locally.
Cool. All right, I got to drop. I will have a bunch of PRs for all of you over the rest of the day today, so we'll talk soon.
Okay.
Cheers.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you. Bye.
Bye.